Imagine this. Two young princes, heirs to the throne of England, vanish without a trace. Their uncle, Richard III, takes the crown, and history brands him a murderer. But here's the thing, no one really knows what happened. Was Richard the villain Shakespeare made him out to be? Or was he just a pawn in a much bigger game of power and betrayal? For over 500 years, the mystery of the princes in the Tower has haunted historians, sparked countless debates, and inspired books, movies, and even conspiracy theories. It's a story of ambition, intrigue, and one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries in history. So what really happened to those two boys? And was Richard III truly the monster history remembers him as? Or is there more to the story? Stick around, because today we're diving deep into one of history's greatest enigmas, Richard III and the princes in the Tower. To understand the mystery of the princes in the Tower, we need to go back to a time when England was torn apart by civil war. This was the era of the Wars of the Roses, a decades-long power struggle between two rival branches of the royal family, the House of York and the House of Lancaster. Both sides claimed the throne, and their battles turned the country into a battlefield. Enter Richard III. Before he was king, he was Richard, Duke of Gloucester, a loyal younger brother to King Edward IV. Richard was a skilled military leader and a key player in the Yorkist cause. But when Edward IV died unexpectedly in 1483, everything changed. Edward's heir was his 12-year-old son, Edward V. But here's where things get messy. Richard was named Lord Protector, essentially the regent who would rule until young Edward came of age. But within months, Richard declared Edward and his younger brother, Richard of Shrewsbury, illegitimate. He took the crown for himself, becoming King Richard III. It was a time of chaos and suspicion. The throne was a prize fought over with blood and betrayal, and trust was in short supply. The political instability was so intense that no one's position was safe, not even a king's. And in the middle of all this turmoil, two young princes disappeared. So, what led to this moment? Was Richard's rise to power a calculated move? Or was he just trying to survive in a world where one wrong step could mean death? Let's dig deeper. Now let's meet the central figures of this mystery. Edward V and his younger brother, Richard of Shrewsbury. These two boys were the sons of King Edward IV, the Yorkist king who had brought a temporary peace to England after the Wars of the Roses. Edward V was just 12 years old when his father died, and Richard was only 9. As the eldest son, Edward V was the rightful heir to the throne. His coronation was set to take place, and England was preparing to welcome a new boy king. But then, something went terribly wrong. Before Edward could be crowned, he and his brother were taken to the Tower of London, not as prisoners, at least not officially, but for their protection. The Tower wasn't just a prison. It was also a royal residence, a place where kings and queens stayed before their coronations. So at first, it might not have seemed unusual, but weeks turned into months, and the princes were never seen in public again. They vanished without a trace. Think about it. Two boys, born into one of the most powerful families in the world, destined to rule a kingdom, just gone. What happened to them? Were they murdered? Did they escape? Or were they hidden away, their identities erased to protect them or someone else? This is where the mystery deepens. 2 young lives, snuffed out or silenced, and a throne left empty. The question is, who stood to gain the most from their disappearance? And what does that tell us about the brutal world of medieval politics? Stick with me, because this is where the story takes a dark turn. Let's set the scene. After the death of Edward IV, his 12-year-old son, Edward V, was next in line for the throne. But his uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, stepped in as Lord Protector, claiming he would guide the young king until he was old enough to rule. As part of this arrangement, Edward and his younger brother, Richard of Shrewsbury, were taken to the Tower of London. Now, the Tower wasn't just a prison, it was also a royal residence, a place where kings and queens stayed before their coronations. So at first it might have seemed like a safe move. But then, something changed. Richard declared the princes illegitimate, claiming their father's marriage was invalid. Suddenly, Richard himself was crowned King Richard III, and the boys, well, they were never seen again. This is where the theories start. The most popular one? The princes were murdered, but by whom? Richard III is the prime suspect. After all, he had the most to gain. Their deaths cleared his path to the throne. But here's the thing. There's no solid evidence that Richard ordered their deaths. No bodies were found at the time, no confessions, no eyewitness accounts. Some historians argue that Richard was framed. They point to Henry VII, the man who defeated Richard at the Battle of Bosworth and took the throne. Henry had every reason to paint Richard as a monster to justify his own rule. And let's not forget the Duke of Buckingham, Richard's ally, who later turned against him. Could he have orchestrated the princes' deaths to destabilize Richard's reign? Then there's the possibility that the princes weren't killed at all. Some believe they were smuggled out of the tower and lived in hiding. There were even rumors that one of them resurfaced years later, claiming to be the lost prince. So what's the truth? Did Richard III order the murder of his own nephews? Or was he a victim of Tudor propaganda? His name dragged through the mud to legitimize a new dynasty. The answer might be lost to history. But one thing's for sure. This mystery has kept us guessing for centuries. Let's talk about the case against Richard III. On the surface, it seems pretty damning. Here's a man who declared his nephews illegitimate, took the throne for himself, and then, conveniently, the princes vanished. Coincidence? Maybe. But when you look at the timing, it's hard not to raise an eyebrow. Richard was ambitious. He'd spent years fighting for the Yorkist cause, and when his brother Edward IV died, Richard saw an opportunity. As Lord Protector, he had control over the young king and his brother, and then just months later, he was crowned king himself. The princes, gone. It's a sequence of events that doesn't exactly paint Richard in a good light. But here's where it gets complicated. Much of what we know about Richard III comes from his enemies, specifically the Tudors. After Richard was killed at the Battle of Bosworth, Henry VII took the throne. And what's the first thing a new king does? He makes sure everyone believes he's the hero. Henry VII had every reason to smear Richard's name, and he did exactly that. Then came Shakespeare. In his play Richard III, Shakespeare turned Richard into a hunchbacked, scheming villain who would stop at nothing to seize power. It's a gripping story, but it's also propaganda. Shakespeare was writing during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, Henry VII's granddaughter. Of course, he wasn't going to paint Richard in a positive light. So, was Richard III truly the monster history remembers him as? Or was he a victim of political slander, his reputation destroyed by the very people who benefited from his downfall? The truth is, we may never know for sure. But one thing's clear. Richard's story is a reminder that history is often written by the winners, and sometimes the winners have their own agenda. Okay, so if Richard III isn't the clear-cut villain, then who else could be behind the disappearance of the princes? Let's dive into some alternative suspects. First up, Henry VII. Yes, the man who defeated Richard at the Battle of Bosworth and became king. Henry had a lot to gain from the princes' deaths. If they were alive, they were a threat to his claim to the throne. Some historians believe Henry might have had them killed after he took power, then pinned the blame on Richard to make himself look like the hero. Then there's the Duke of Buckingham, Richard's one-time ally who later turned against him. Buckingham had his own ambitions, and some think he might have orchestrated the princes' deaths to destabilize Richard's reign. But here's the twist. Buckingham was executed by Richard for treason. Was that because he knew too much? Or was Richard just cleaning house? And what about someone else entirely? Could it have been a nobleman loyal to the Lancastrians, trying to stir up trouble? Or even someone within the tower itself, acting on their own agenda? Here's the frustrating part. We don't have concrete evidence to point the finger at anyone. No bodies were found at the time, no confessions, no smoking gun. All we have are theories, rumors, and a whole lot of unanswered questions. So, if not Richard, then who? The truth is, we may never know. But that's what makes this mystery so fascinating. It's a puzzle with missing pieces, a story where the ending is still up for debate. And that's what keeps us coming back for more. Fast forward to 1674, nearly 200 years after the princes disappeared. Workers at the Tower of London were renovating a staircase near the White Tower when they made a chilling discovery. 2 small skeletons buried beneath the stones. The bones were believed to belong to 2 children, and immediately people began to wonder. Could these be the remains of Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury? The skeletons were eventually buried in Westminster Abbey, but the mystery didn't end there. Centuries later, in 1933, the bones were examined by experts. The findings? They were indeed the remains of 2 children, roughly the same ages as the princes when they vanished. But here's the catch. The forensic analysis couldn't confirm their identities. There was no DNA testing back then, and the evidence was too inconclusive to say for sure. Modern technology might have given us more answers, but there's a problem. The bones are now considered a historical artifact, and the Church of England has refused further testing. So, we're left with more questions than answers. Were these really the princes? If so, how did they die? And if not, whose children were they, and why were they buried in such a secretive location? It's a discovery that could have solved one of history's greatest mysteries, but instead, it's only deepened the intrigue. Could these bones finally reveal the truth about the princes in the tower? Or are they just another piece of a puzzle that may never be solved? The mystery lives on. The mystery of the princes in the tower isn't just a historical footnote. It's a story that has captured the imagination of people for centuries. It's been retold in countless books, from historical analyses to gripping novels. It's been dramatized on stage, most famously in Shakespeare's Richard III, where Richard is portrayed as the ultimate villain. And it's been brought to life in films and TV shows, each offering its own take on what might have happened. But why does this story resonate so deeply? Maybe it's because it taps into something universal, our fascination with unsolved mysteries. There's something about a puzzle without an answer that keeps us hooked. We want to know the truth, even if it's been buried for centuries. This story also forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about power and betrayal. Was Richard III a ruthless murderer, or was he just a man trying to survive in a brutal world? And what does it say about us that we're so quick to believe the worst about him, even when the evidence is shaky? At its heart, the mystery of the princes in the tower is a reminder that history isn't always what it seems. It's shaped by the people who tell it, and sometimes the truth gets lost along the way. So what does this story tell us about power, betrayal, and the way history is written? Maybe the real question is, whose version of the truth do we choose to believe? So let's recap. The princes in the tower, Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury, vanished in 1483, and their disappearance remains one of history's greatest mysteries. Was their uncle, Richard III, responsible? Or was he framed by his enemies like Henry VII? Were the princes murdered, or did they escape and live in hiding? And what about those bones found in the tower? Could they finally solve the mystery, or do they just add more questions? The truth is, we may never know for sure. But that's what makes this story so compelling. It's a puzzle with missing pieces, a mystery that keeps us guessing even after 500 years. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think happened to the princes in the tower? Was Richard III guilty, or was he a victim of history? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your theories. History is full of secrets, and this one might just stay hidden forever. But one thing's for sure. The mystery of the princes in the tower will continue to fascinate us for generations to come. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into history's greatest enigmas. Until next time, keep questioning the past, because sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction.